So the brief for tonight was to talk about keeping your mind in check and coping strategies, which is really vague, and I'm not really good at doing vague briefs. So if at any point you don't understand, please ask. And I've also tried to make it interactive. So even though you've been asked to turn your mics off, there are times where I'll ask you to turn your mics back on so that you can maybe answer questions and contribute so that we can kind of work together. Okay, so I'm guessing that there's quite a few people who feel a bit like this at the moment. And I thought, when I saw this Barbie, I was like, yeah, I've seen lots of things on social medias that are portraying people with not changing in their pajamas, hair needing to go to the hairdresser, drinking too much coffee, maybe too much wine. And I just thought it was a good picture to have. The first question that I would like to ask to everyone though is there anything that you're hoping to get out of tonight? Is there anything specific that you would like me to cover? Because I am also happy to adapt and make sure that I'm meeting everyone's needs. So feel free to unmute yourself and let me know if there's something that's really burning that you'd like me to talk about. No burning things? That's okay. Okay, so basically what I'm going to go through today is there's a couple of things that I want you to take away, and that's increasing your ability to recognize how you're feeling and why you might be acting in a certain way, reframe some of the thoughts and experiences that you may be having at the current time, and then responding to these thoughts and experiences in maybe more helpful ways, and then giving you some strategies that may be more helpful than what we are doing at the moment. So I just want, before I go into talking about this, I just want people to have a think to themselves or pop it in the chat, how you're currently feeling and what are some of the things you might be doing to change those feelings. They don't have to be helpful. They don't have to be, you don't have to be running 10Ks every day and blow drying your hair. It could be things that are unhelpful, because it's important to recognize the unhelpful things as well as the helpful things so that we can know that they're happening. So before we go any further, I thought I'd talk about the interaction that our thoughts, feelings and behaviors have. It's not something that we are always aware of. We're not always conscious that we've got thoughts that are impacting our feelings, which are then impacting our behaviors. But as you can see from the picture, it is a bit of a circle. So it doesn't go one way. It's not thoughts just interacting with feelings or feelings just interacting with behaviors. It becomes this cycle that goes over and over and over. And what we see happening is we have a thought, and that might be an unhelpful thought, it might be a helpful thought, and that leads to us having a feeling. If it's an uncomfortable feeling, we tend to respond in a way that makes that uncomfortable feeling go away or lessen. And the more times we do that, the more that it becomes a habit or just a way that we respond. And so every time we're doing that, we're creating or reinforcing a pathway in our brain. I'm going to add another picture to the diagram, and that is the physical, because it's often overlooked, but it is something that comes into play so often. And we'll have a thought and our body will react to the feeling that comes from that thought. So if you're feeling happy, you might start to be all excited and jumpy and not be able to sit still. And if you're feeling sad, you might feel that your body starts to feel really lethargic. You don't feel like getting out of bed. You don't feel like moving. So it is like a four-way interaction as well. So everything bounces off everything else. And it's a bit more about not trying to change all the elements, but focusing on one element at a time and seeing how that then leads to other things which might change. Was there a chat that came through?
We've just had someone ask best ways to cope with me time and my family. And somebody else has just said, I'd like to know what it looks like to be gentle with yourself. Everyone keeps saying it to me, but some practical strategies would be good. Not over-treating myself, keeping a balance between self-care and total sloth.
Okay.
And then just lots of people sharing how they've been feeling and what they've been doing to cope with that.
Okay, perfect. I can't seem to be able to see the chat and the share the PowerPoint at the same time, so I'm not sure what. So
all good.
If there's any questions that come through, could you just let me know?
Yeah.
Okay. And for those questions and statements that came through, we can talk about those as well. So with this interaction, we're going to talk about the physical now. So the physical is the fight, flight, or freeze, which you've probably heard talked about, but I just want to briefly give you a bit more information about why that happens. And the thing is that our brain wants to keep us safe. It's there to make sure that whatever we do, we're being safe. When we lived in caves, we saw a tiger, our brain learned that we could either fight the tiger or we could run away from the tiger. And they were our options. If we fought the tiger, what would be the outcome? Probably wouldn't survive unless we had physical strength and tools and things like that. So often the go-to is to run away. As we've evolved from being cave people and we've kind of changed how we live, our brain is still wired to put to that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And when it does that, it physically changes our body. So the part of our brain that's responsible for that is called the amygdala. And it's kind of like a smoke alarm in the brain. And if you've ever burnt toast and your smoke alarm's gone off, that's kind of what the amygdala does, in that it doesn't really care if it's smoke from a fire or if it's smoke from burnt toast or burnt biscuits. All it does is it want to make sure that you know about it. When your amygdala thinks you might be in danger, it might hear a song that reminds you of something. You might feel a sensation that reminds you or takes you to a place that you're not comfortable with. Your brain automatically goes into survivor mode. And it does that by changing our body, and all of the hormones and all of the adrenalines and cortisol and everything that's in our body goes from doing what it's supposed to do. So digestion, making sure our heart's beating at a constant, nice tempo, making sure that we're at the right temperature. All of that goes out the window, and it sends all what's needed to our arms and legs so that we can either run away or fight, or we freeze up. And this might look like, so if you're feeling anxious, the butterflies in your stomach are because your stomach's no longer digesting the food. And you might feel dizzy because all the energy that was being used to make sure your breath is nice and regular, subconsciously, we're not consciously going breathe in, breathe out, but all of that is taken to muscles, taken to legs and arms so that we can get away. And sorry, my slides are. So I know that there's been a lot of things going on at the moment with coronavirus, and we've had a lot of changes, and that's put a lot of us into a state of constant stress almost. And people are struggling with how do we change our whole entire lives to be fitting in with what we currently can fit with. And people are punishing themselves for that. They might be being extra hard on themselves. They might be trying to achieve more and more. When it's really important that we acknowledge that what is happening in the world is a stressful event. And it's reasonable that we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling scared, we're feeling stressed, we're feeling angry. There's so many changes, and a lot of people are not good with change when they're prepared for it and they're aware of it, and this happens without those forewarnings. So it's okay to feel stressed. A key part of that is acknowledging those feelings. So not trying to push them away, but saying, yeah, I feel stressed. I've had this huge change of lifestyle. I've had this huge change of everything that I knew. And I've had to adapt really quickly. With all the changes that have been happening, there's probably, I'm making a lot of assumptions here, but there's probably been a lot of thoughts that are happening in your mind. And often they're not helpful thoughts. So they're, I need to get all this done. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do this. And it's been portrayed in the media as well. So a couple of phrases that I'm really sick of hearing in social media, in news reports, in all avenues is unprecedented times, because we get that. We don't need to hear about it anymore. And to hear, what are you going to learn to achieve during this time? And I think that's a really unfortunate thing to do, because when our bodies are already stressed, we don't have the capacity to learn a new language, to go off and learn how to be gourmet chefs. We don't have the space to do that, but we're getting all these messages that say we should. And I'm not saying that I am exempt from that. When coronavirus first started, I was like, great, okay, might have some more time in my day. I'm going to go make a list. And I made a list of all the things that I wanted to do while we were essentially in a lockdown. And I started to feel overwhelmed as well. And I started to panic about, well, how am I going to get all of these things done? What am I going to do? When am I going to find the time? Because life doesn't stop. We still have families. We still have feelings. We still have work. We've shifted work. We still have kids. And then I had to stop and I had to think, well, do I need to get all of these things done? Let's be honest, they weren't all realistic. On my list, I had, let's add an extra room to our house, and let's build a fence, and let's build a... These things aren't things that we can possibly do when we're feeling fit and healthy. Well, I can't build a house, but when we're feeling fit and healthy, let alone when we're already in a heightened state of arousal. And these thoughts started going around and around and around in my mind. And I'm imagining that there's a lot of people who have similar thoughts that go around. It's interesting because over the course of the day, we have around 80,000 thoughts. 80,000, not 8,000, 80,000. That's a lot of thoughts. And a lot of them are subconscious. And that means that we're not consciously making ourselves think these ways. They're just kind of flowing around in the back of our brain, and we're absorbing them and moving on. If having 80,000 thoughts a day wasn't scary enough, 80% of those are exactly the same thoughts that we had yesterday. What that means is, if you're having thoughts about not being good enough, not being able to do something, your own self-worth, your own perceptions of yourself, they're being repeated and repeated and repeated. The more that we repeat those thoughts, the more ingrained they become in our brains. So if you can imagine that your brain is like a bushwalking path, and when you go bushwalking, you have this path in the middle, and everybody walks on that road and they go. And the reason why we can see the path is because there's so many people walking on it. Either side of the pathway, there's bush, there's scrub, there's bushes and trees and all sorts of things. We could walk through the bushes and the trees. That would be more difficult though. It's easier to take the road we've already developed. And that's what's happening in our brain, is that taking this road that we've always taken is a lot easier than trying to make a new one. It's not impossible though. So we are able to change the path we take. It just takes a little bit of perseverance and a little bit of practice. So sometimes we can, if we remember the interaction of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and the physical, if we change one aspect of that, sometimes we can see a flow-on effect. So if I change my thought from I've not gotten anything done today to it's important to give myself space to rest, this reframes how you are experiencing things. So you go from having pressure of I've not done this, which can lead to feelings of sadness, depression, more tiredness, maybe feeling anxious, feeling more of an accepting space. So you might still feel a little bit anxious, you might still feel tired, but with less pressure on yourself to have achieved all of these things. And the quote that I've got on there is one that I find quite reassuring, in that our worth isn't measured by our productivity. Despite what media tells us, despite what we would think, we don't need to have all of these things done to have value. Simply being ourselves means that we're valuable. Okay, so I think this is the part that most of you were interested in, is the coping skills. And when we're responding to stressful situations, it's important that we have a range of things to do. So when I'm working with kids and adults as well, we often come up with options. So rather than having just one thing that you go to, and this is your go-to thing to do, we have a range of different things that we can do, because sometimes that one thing won't work, or we might not be able to do that when we're at work, or when we're at the shop, or when we've got screaming kids around us. So when we have a bunch of things to do, we can then pick and choose and know this one works better in this situation, this one works better in this situation. And we often call these either our octopus of options or our treasure box of tips. You can come up with other names, but sometimes it's good to have catchy names. And I've made this little guy for when I work in clinic, and he's the octopus of options. And what we do is we come up with 8 different options and we stick them to his legs, and then we figure out when we might use this one, when we might use that one. Sometimes I find it helpful to have something that we can physically touch and we can be kind of in the same space with, rather than just having words up or having them in our brain, because the more times that we can repeat these things and the more multi-sensory modalities we can have it coming from, the easier that these pathways in our brain can be developed, and the more easily we can retrieve this information. So I'm wondering what does everybody use at the moment as their favourite coping strategy? And I'm going to stop my share for a moment so that I can read the chats that are coming through. Or feel free to unmute yourself and talk to me. I don't mind. Having a bath with essential oils? Have none? Avoiding it? Yep. Yoga, podcasts, running. Yeah, so they're all really helpful things to do. Set it for 15 minutes and I'm usually asleep. Gym. Yeah, I've had a lot of clients missing the gym at the moment. Meditation. Netflix, I like that one, locking yourself in office. The list of things that we could possibly do is nearly endless. So if you can think of something that you find helpful, then that's great. The thing to be mindful about and to remember is that if it works for you, that's great, but if it's maybe not helpful, so drinking a bottle of wine is probably not helpful. It might be good in the moment, but it may not help with things that are happening outside. So it's okay that we sometimes push things under the rug. However, I'm not saying that we can do that. I'm saying more that if we're in a situation where we can't manage that experience right now, if we can put it in a box or put it somewhere in ourselves and come back to it later, that's the important part, rather than pushing it under that rug until the rug's piled this high and we've got all of these issues and everything's just kind of piled up on top of us. That's when it becomes unhelpful. So all of the things that you've said are great. Locking yourself in the office is probably only good if there's someone to look after the children, but that's okay. I think Chantel had a colouring book in front of her before she turned her video off, and that's a great way of centering yourself and regulating yourself. I often think that reflecting on what you like to do as a child can give you great insights into what will be helpful for you now. If you like to listen to music when you were younger, then there's the colour in your book. Yep. If you like listening to music when you were younger, then maybe it's music that you need. Maybe you have different playlists. You have a happy playlist. You have a sad playlist. You have a playlist for when you're feeling stressed. It might be that you take a bath, someone mentioned. If you've got pets can be a great way of letting your stress out. So you can touch them, you can pet them, you can talk to them, and they generally don't talk back, which can be helpful, but they can be really great for just getting the information out of yourself so that you're not holding on to it yourself anymore. It might be that you go outside and you stand barefoot on the grass. If you have some sensory things and don't like that, it's probably not helpful. But connecting with nature or connecting with what's around you, so whether it's carpet or tiles or lino, just making sure that your feet are really planted on the ground and you can sense that you're connected to that can be a really big game changer. Aromatherapy, I think, was mentioned. Playing games, if cooking's your thing, cooking. Some people like to knit or crochet or those kind of things. If that's what you need to do, then that's okay. Gardening, yoga, having a drink of tea or coffee, or just spending that time when we're engaging in these coping skills and strategies. It's not about how long we spend in doing them, it's about the quality of time that we spend doing them. So if you're colouring, it's about focusing on that colour and being really mindful of how you're colouring, how the pencil pen feels in my hand, how the paper feels under my hand, so that you're focused on that. If you're drinking a cup of tea, it's about holding that mug and feeling the warmness rather than just kind of sculling it down and moving on to the next thing. It's really crucial that we start to think about slowing down in this busy world, because the more that we try and push ourselves through all the busyness, the harder it gets for us to do that pushing. So sometimes it sounds kind of productive, but it's sometimes important for us to take a step back and go, actually, I need to slow down and I need to just sit here with my Netflix show or my aromatherapy oils going, or my massaging my hands with a cream. I have creams in every single desk drawer that I have, so that if I ever feel overwhelmed, I can just pull one out. And if you have an aromatherapy one, that can be helpful as well. Sometimes we need to walk away from situations. Again, not forever, but just for that moment while we re-regulate ourselves. So there's no benefit from trying to push yourself through things when we're in that stress response, or our brain has kind of got us in that fight or flight, because it's too hard for us to process. The part of our brain, so the front part of our brain that does the thinking, is no longer online. We need to get that back on board through the coping strategies before we can then start to problem solve situations, come up with solutions, or work around those kind of things. I've got a couple of guided meditations here that we could do, but I'm aware that I'm probably going to go over time, so I might just leave them till the end, and we can come back to them if we need to. I'm going to share my screen again just so that you can see this. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning. So this SelfCare card is one that I developed a couple years ago now, I think, and I think it speaks to some of the questions we had about what to do with me time and how to be gentle with ourselves. And self-care here is an acronym for what can help us with that. So making sure that we get good quality sleep, exercising, laughing, having time to focus, not on work, but on the meditation, on the relaxing, on ourselves, connecting with other people. Difficult to connect in person at the current time, but we can call people, we can text people, we can have meme conversations. Just making sure that you're staying in contact with those that you feel like you need to stay in contact with. Asking for help is a big one that a lot of people struggle with, and that can be asking for help from friends and family, or it can be asking for help from a psychologist, a counsellor, alternative therapist, any form of help that you feel like you need at that time. Making sure to restore yourself, so nourishing with food and pampering yourself, and experiment with different things. So like I said before, we need a treasure chest of tips, because sometimes things don't work when we want them to work, and sometimes we can't do them in that situation. So it's important to have lots of different ones to try. This is sometimes we feel overwhelmed with the amount of things that we have to do. Things get out of hand. We're not sure how to cope. Coming into coronavirus, there was a lot of this, and I'm mindful that there's probably going to be a similar experience when we come out of coronavirus as we readjust to how things are. So that's not to say that things are going to go back to exactly how they were before coronavirus, but we will have to adjust to a new normal. And I think it's important to start establishing these things so that we can prepare ourselves. So create a routine. You don't have to routine or plan to the minute, but having a general outline. So I wake up and I have a cup of coffee, and then I go for a run, and then I have breakfast, and then or before I go to bed, I have a shower, I brush my teeth, I have a herbal tea, I do a 5-minute meditation, whatever it might be that is your routine, but making sure that you have that and you hold on to that if it's going to keep you like you're feeling calm. I think celebrating the small things is really important. So on those days that are really hard, if you got out of bed, then you should celebrate that. If you brushed your teeth, fantastic. If you made your bed, even better. If we have all of these, like the list I made of 50 things, if we have all of these things that we're trying to accomplish and we can't finish that list, sometimes we then feel terrible because we didn't finish it and neglect that we actually did get things ticked off. So if we can start with the small, we're already setting ourselves up to succeed. There's a researcher in the US who researches changing habits and exercise and things like that. And he wanted to see if he could become fitter. And he was, I think, about 50 or 60 when he decided he wanted to get fit. And instead of going and joining a gym and saying that he was going to start running marathons and do all of these weights and go to the gym 7 days a week, he said that his starting point was to do 10 push-ups a day. Those could be 10 in one go, or they could be 10 spread out throughout the day. But his goal was not to try and do everything that he wanted to do, but start small so that when he'd done those 10 push-ups, he could celebrate. If he decided after he'd done the 10 that he wanted to do another 10, great. That's okay. But it's about starting at an achievable spot rather than trying to kind of set the bar up here and then always feeling terrible because we've only achieved down here. It sounds a bit contradictory, so create a routine and then be flexible, but it is important to have some flexibility because things do change. Sometimes things break. We may run out of coffee. We may not be able to go for a run because it's raining, and that's okay. As long as you're not punishing yourself or trying to make yourself go harder the next day or do something different the next day. It's all about compromise, and when I say compromise, looking over a week, and rather than saying I did it this day, this day, this day, and this day, it's well, over the week I did achieve this. So generally, I think generally rather than compromise is probably a better word. And we can have a more global picture rather than focusing on the smaller things that we maybe haven't achieved. Focusing on what we can control is really important because there's a lot of things in life that we can't control, and that's tough and that's yucky and we don't like those feelings. So if we can focus on what we can control, creating the routine, making sure we've got a healthy diet, healthy social life, we're showering, things like that, then it can give us a good step up for being able to achieve some of the bigger things on our list. Taking social media breaks can be helpful. That's not saying that you need to turn social media off altogether. You can if you want. I'm more with this thinking about or talking about being mindful about who are you following, what's their content like, are you watching too much news and then doom and gloom and then becoming overwhelmed with all of that. So just being mindful of how much of that you're consuming and taking in. Worry time is a really funny little tip and trick that I use quite often. And what it is it's scheduling a time to worry or to be angry or to be sad, so that we're containing and controlling that worry. So rather than worrying every time we have a thought or worrying every time we have a feeling, we write that down and say, okay, I acknowledge that I'm having this. However, I'm going to consider that or think about that during worry time. And that means that you pick 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, and you only worry during that time. And when you're worrying during that time, you can focus on that. You can cry, you can yell, you can scream. It's a safe space. But when your 15 minutes is up, it's time to pack those worries away and now move on. Because often we worry about not being able to worry, or we worry about worrying too much, and it becomes this bit of a cycle. So if we contain it into a 15-minute block, it can sometimes help us have more control over that. And then self-compassion is where we're not being lazy, we're not being unrealistic, but we're having compassion for those days that are hard, those days that we maybe didn't do all of the 6 things that are on the screen. That's okay. If we got one of them done, that's a great job. Acknowledging that we maybe need a little bit of help with doing some things can be self-compassion. On the self-care list, it's acknowledging that maybe I didn't sleep well. That's okay. I'm going to move on and not let that impact me too greatly. One of the biggest tips I have is start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. If you want to run a marathon, you don't start by running 42 kilometers. You start with shorter, more achievable distances, and then you gradually work your way up. And as you achieve those smaller distances, you can tick them off and you can feel accomplished, opposed to feeling uncomfortable or sad or angry when you try to run a 42K and don't achieve that. I just thought I'd share this. So Action for Happiness is an organisation that shares these really cute little calendars nearly every month. And they've just got things on that you can do every day. They're not big things, they're little things, but they're just something that can make us aware of being more positive, being more centered, being more grounded. So I think today's is sharing photos of 3 things that you find meaningful and memorable. And that's a little bit like the gratitude practice that goes around, where every day you write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And at first it's hard, but the more that you focus on that, the easier that it becomes. And that's another important point, in that the more that you focus on something, the easier it is for your brain to bring that into memory and to think about that. And I often use the example of, have you noticed any red cars today? And often people are like, I couldn't see a red car. And I say, well, when you leave here, don't notice the red cars. Just pretend they're not there. And because I've put that thought in your conscious awareness, you're now going to notice all the red cars that are everywhere. So it's important to remember that what we focus on tends to be able to be retrieved easier, and what we think as important, then that's going to be retrieved from our brain easier. So being mindful about what content we're putting into our bodies, what content we're letting come out, and how we can manage if we're not happy with that. And then this is my last slide that I'm going to share. And this is probably the one thing that is the most simple to do, but yet the hardest, and also the most able to be done in a lot of situations. So it's taking a deep breath, it's getting present in the moment. And then the end of this is asking yourself, what is important at this very second? And acknowledging that and using that to inform what choice you might make. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop my share and happy to take questions, concerns, comments. Was it helpful? Was that not helpful? Oh, currently having a Snapchat break, and someone else deleted Snapchat. Controlling things so hard. So there's a question from Emily, or statement, I guess. I find the control thing so hard. I know what I can control, but I feel like I'm not doing enough when I only focus on those things. And that comes back to the point that I was talking about, how having control is good, but having those little points. So if you can only control what time you wake up, or if you can only control what clothes you wear, start with that and then go from there. So it's not about going from having or feeling like you have no control to trying to control everything. It's about picking 1 or 2 things to start with. And then once you've got that as a pattern in your brain, you've made a pathway, it's easy to retrieve, then you can add another one or change it. Because the more that we do things, the easier it becomes. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but let me know if that doesn't make any sense. Four-year-olds bring us back to the present moment. Kids definitely bring us back to the present. And it is often the kids that give us the biggest insights into things. So you watch their awe and their wonder at the seemingly irrelevant things in life. And we were once like that. We can still be like that. It's just that we grow up and we get distracted and we forget that there's lots of small joys in life. There's lots of little things that we can be aware of. It's more about being aware of those and bringing those to our attention rather than rushing so much that we forget that they're in existence. Any other questions? Did I answer everything that you wanted me to? Is there anything that I missed?
I think we might be okay if there's nothing else. Yeah.
Yeah, no, unless you've got questions or you want me to do some demonstrations.
Emily's just said, yeah, I guess around the balance.
Balance. Emily, do you mean balance in what way? How do you know you're not just wallowing in self-care? That's a good question. It's a tough line to kind of trod, and there's not a one size fits all, and there's not a one size fits one person all the time. It tends to, the better that we get at listening to ourselves, the easier it is for us to know what that balance looks like. Some people have really telltale signs of when the balance is out. So if we're not engaging in enough self-care practices, I'll get to that question in a second. If we aren't engaging in enough self-care practices, we might start to notice that we're reaching for the chocolate, or we're not sleeping as well, or we've got more aches and pains than we generally have. And it's important to be aware of when those things kind of pop up, because then we can go, well, actually, maybe I do need to take a bath. Maybe I do need to spend that extra time watching reruns of Gossip Girl or whatever it might be. So it's not an easy answer, and it's not necessarily an easy fix, but I think it's more about you being aware of what you need. And who's to say that you're spending too much time wallowing in self-care? It might be that that's what you need right then. If it's without knowing situations, it is a hard thing to kind of comment on. But if you're still doing 5,000 things a day and not having time to take self-care, that's probably an indication that you do need to take a little bit more time. Again, don't start by saying, that's it, I'm taking a whole day. Start by having that mindful cup of tea, or going for that slow walk around the house, and see if that helps kind of rebalance or readjust how you're feeling. There's going to be times where we feel like we need more self-care than other times. So sometimes we might need a lot, and other times we might not need as much. And that all comes to knowing yourself. And unfortunately, the only person who can truly know yourself is yourself. So I can give lots of tips and strategies, but I think it's really important that we listen to our bodies and we do what they're telling us to do. Because if we don't, they will stop working. And they will tell us that, no, we've got the flu and now we have to stay in bed. Sometimes do I just need to suck it up? Yes. Unfortunately, in today's world, we do need to suck it up, but it is probably a different way to phrase that is to postpone the self-care, or to pause the self-care, or the phrase is just a little bit more gentle than saying suck it up. which is kind of telling us that we're not going to get it. We just need to sweep it under the mat and move on. So in those times where we might need to do that, it's about, right now, I need to complete whatever task this is. However, when I finish that, that's when I will do the self-care. And I once had one of my colleagues say that self-care can be to do things. If you've got deadlines and you need to go to work to meet those deadlines, then that may be a form of self-care for you in that moment. If it's every day, that's becoming a bit unbalanced. But if it's once in a month, say end of financial year, you're really busy, or end of month, you're really busy, then that might be acceptable. And again, I'd be mindful of the phrasing that you're using. There was a question, how do you know you're not just going insane? I'm not sure what the context is with that one. If you feel like you're going insane, it might be about time to take a little bit of time for yourself, the me time, maybe taking kids to the park. Can we take kids to the park at the moment? I think we can. Taking kids to the park and putting them on a swing and being mindful of what the movement is. So you're not necessarily on the swing, but you're reconnecting and you're still able to kind of watch the kids and make sure that they're safe. If you do feel like you're going insane, I would say that that's a bit of an indication that there's something off balance in your life, and it might be that you do need to take a further step and maybe see a psychologist or see a counsellor or have a coffee date with friends with no kids, just to kind of regain that balance. Don't get you started on it. Yeah, no. Does that answer your concern, Chantal? To a degree. Okay. You might want to, if you want to talk about it a bit more, you might, we might want to take it offline because it could be a bit tricky to address.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have any other questions?